On today's Newsmakers, Whoopi Goldberg has once again sparked outrage for comments she made on The View about Iran and America, essentially comparing conditions in the two countries. We are going to be joined today by Jeff King from International Christian Concern. He has a lot to say about that comparison here on the show. With no further ado, here is Jeff King. Whoopi Goldberg is in the headlines for some comments she made last week about Iran and America, essentially comparing, it seemed, based on what she said on the air, life in America, to life in Iran. I'm joined by Jeff King today. Jeff, before we roll a quick clip so people can see what was said, what was your reaction when you first saw this segment?
Oh, gosh, there were so many levels. The first one is a big head scratch. At the same time, I completely understand Whoopi and The View and what I'm watching. But let's just start with that. It's a complete head scratch, for the normal American. Let's say that.
Yeah, I think, and there are a lot of reasons for that. There are people who are watching or listening right now who are very aware of life in Iran. You're an expert on persecution. You deal with this all the time. You talk a lot about Christian persecution, so we could kind of start there, and we'll do that in a moment. I want to play the clip, but this is sort of the world you live in, so you understand when somebody makes a comparison between life in a country that routinely finds itself at the top of the worst possible places for Christians to live in the world and for women to live and for other minority groups to live, and compares that to America, that becomes, as you were saying, a head scratcher. But before we get into all that, let's just roll a quick clip from The View so people can see what it is precisely that we're talking about.
But let's just remember, too, the Iranians literally throw gay people off of buildings. They don't adhere to basic human rights.
Listen, here's the thing. Let's not do that, because if we start with that, we have been known in this country to tie gay folks to the car.
Where the Iranian regime is today in 2025 is nothing compared to the United States.
Hanging black people. So
it is not even the same. I couldn't step foot during this.
Wait. That's not what you mean to say. It is the same.
No, it's not. The year 2025 in the United States is nothing like if I step foot wearing this outfit in Toronto.
Listen, I'm sorry.
I can't have my hair showing. I can't wear a skirt. I can't have my arms out.
I'm telling you,
I literally said it was up to the Iranian people.
Yes,
it is up to them.
And that's why I am saying that it is the same. Murdering someone for their difference is not good, whoever does it. It's not good. So that's why I said you weren't saying what I heard was not what you meant.
I think it's very different to live in the United States in 2025 than it is to live in Iran.
Not if you're black.
Not for everybody.
Okay, Jeff, so that is the context for which we are speaking about right now. Let's just start with the persecution issue in Iran. Help people understand what life is like for Christians who are living there in that Muslim theocracy.
So over 40 years, the Iranian regime, has tortured and assassinated Christians. And when, they've, in the past, they were arresting the masses of Christians. And Billy, as you know, Christianity has grown so deep in Iran that actually they can't even arrest the masses anymore, but they're still arresting the leadership, the top influencers, arresting and then torturing. When I say torture, it's hard to imagine what this means for the average person. They go into Evin prison. It's a notorious place. It's known as the terror factory and the torture factory. So that gives you a little insight. But males and females are both raped. It's really satanic what they do, but absolutely have tried to crush Christians and Christianity. And all they've done really is built the Christian church in Iran over the decades.
It is interesting, and we see this, I think, from a Christian perspective, understanding that you can't stop the gospel, right? So, all of these regimes, not just in Iran, all over the world, they'll try to do this where they try to crack down on Christianity, and you watch it grow, and you see millions of people become believers. The underground church in Iran is apparently massive. It's, of course, hard to do a census of the church for obvious reasons, but how big do we think it is? How large do we think that underground, and it has to be underground because of what you just described, church is in Iran?
I don't have the latest stats on it, but it's known as probably the fastest growing church in the world, Billy. It's absolutely massive. And I'll tell you a little story. In years past, we were involved in pulling pastors out of Iran, and you pull them into a neighboring country. You just let them breathe. You let them worship together, worship in freedom. Oh my gosh, I'll come to tears thinking about it. Really, really beautiful, beautiful experience. But one of those pastors, I was interviewing him, and I interviewed a bunch of them. And he said it was always amusing when the Western pastors came in and tried to teach evangelism to the Iranians, because he said, look, here's, they would have all their methods and everything in the U.S. way to do things. They said, that's not it at all. He says, here's how I do evangelism. I go to a party and I stand up and say, hey, I'm a Christian. And if you want to talk about Christianity or Jesus, I'm going to be back in the corner there. You come talk to me. He says, then I'm mobbed. I'm absolutely mobbed for 3-4 hours as long as I want. It'll go on and on. That's the level of interest in Christianity. And we see that with church growth. It's absolutely a massive movement. The mosques are generally empty except for the old. The church is growing like wildfire.
So coming back to life in Iran versus life in America, what was so interesting was Alyssa Farah Griffin, who is a co-host of Whoopi's On The View. She was trying to reason with Whoopi and say that, and here's an exact quote, the U.S. in 2025 is not as bad as Iran in 2025. She was explaining that there's no comparison between the two on a multitude of fronts: religious liberty, women, down the line. One of the reports we saw that we reported on at CBN News was that the internet was shut down in Iran by the government after Israeli strikes began. I mean, that alone, our internet in America has never been, as far as I know, shut down across the entire country by the U.S. government, even as cities have been burning and chaos has brewed in different parts of the country. Talk a little bit about the general situation. We talked about persecution in Iran and differentiate it from the way that we live here in America.
Yeah, well, first of all, I may have to push back. You described her as a co-host. I think she's the token conservative. She's a straw man to be knocked down on the show because, let's be honest, The View, it's a communications arm of a political party, and it masquerades as television. So this is pure politics. It's really meant to, inflame, divide, grab attention, and in the end, produce votes. So given all that, I'd say there's no comparison. Look, Tehran, the Iranian regime is the absolute enemy of freedom, of democracy. They are hated, widely hated in their own country because they're inept as managers. They're absolutely corrupt. They're evil. They're violent. They're violent towards their own people. So, and there, as you pointed out, look, there is no freedom. There's no comparison. And perhaps the most ironic or amusing thing is everything Whoopi stands for would get her at the least beaten or arrested, tortured, or murdered in Iran.
Well, and it's interesting because the dialogue, the U.S. in 2025 is not as bad as Iran in 2025. Alyssa Farah Griffin trying to make that differentiation. Whoopi's response was not if you're black. And so it became sort of a conversation about, and of course, our country has history on, like every country, on a multitude of issues that is not perfect because human beings are sinful. And there are things that even today need to be dealt with. But the idea that these things are comparable, I think, was what people were reacting to, regardless of what issues might exist. The idea that we're comparing a country where the internet is shut off, where somebody was, as far as I understand it, killed after not wearing their head covering last year. That was a big issue, was it not? I think it was last year, the year before. And that's just one story. You hear about many of the other stories in the ministry work that you do. I mean, it almost boggles the mind, the conversation. That's not saying, if you were to say Iran is much worse, that's not saying there are no issues ever in America and we're clear and white as snow always. We're not saying that, right? What we're saying is there's no comparison between the two.
Yeah, absolutely not. And I think what Whoopi's doing, what The View does, is the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So anything Trump is doing, of course, he's the Antichrist and must be opposed. And we must inflame people. We must get people activated and angry. Again, in the end, it's to produce votes. But yeah, and I think what she fails to miss is that, and you just alluded to it, that racism is a human sin. It's not an American sin by any means. All across history, every race, every culture, it's embedded into us. We are tribal to the core. We oppose that which is different, which we don't understand, et cetera, and we attack it. And America, of course, has a huge black eye when it comes to racism. But I can't think of any other country that's gone farther. In history, there's been nothing like what we've done to try to right that wrong. And, I think we're living out the dream of Martin Luther King right now. It's not perfect, and there's still racism on both sides.
Yeah, it's as you sort of look at this, there's another angle I want to hit on, because your work is dealing with persecution and dealing with the horrific situations in countries like Iran. When you make a comparison like this, there's a real danger, at least in my perspective, of diminishing what is actually going on somewhere, because you're comparing it to a place where there is ultimate First Amendment freedom. It's not perfect, but ultimate freedom, the best, most robust freedom you could ever have. And you're saying, well, these things are comparable. Can you talk a little bit about that just from your perspective as somebody who's dealing with persecution? It feels to me like it almost says, well, don't look over there because it's, basically not all that bad.
I think you just nailed it, Billy. I mean, again, go back to what I was saying about what is the purpose of the view? What is it truly? It's the communications arm of a political party, and it's just that. Don't look over there. Anything these guys are doing is evil, and he is the Antichrist. And I think it just shows a lack of understanding, complete ignorance with what radical Islam is, what the Iranian regime is. Again, decades of murder and torture, and if you don't like the Christians, then look at the gays, look at the liberals, those who love freedom. Again, there's just no comparison. We have so much freedom. It's probably to our detriment today. Is democracy run amok where, we really have a lot of chaos. But this is democracy. It's the worst form of government, but it's the best there is. So, I can't understand that. I just think she really needs to get educated on what radical Islam is and what the Iranian regime is.
Yeah, and there's so much really to unpack, honestly, that we could go on and on here with it. But if you had Whoopi Goldberg in front of you right now and you could deliver a message to her about this, what would you say to maybe help her? Because she very well may believe exactly what she's saying here. What would you say to help her understand this issue better?
Well, I think the first thing would be, I would try to diagnose and to see where her heart truly is. Is she just ignorant? Because I could say, look, what you're watching there is just the worst of politics today. It's what's going on. And on the far side of either political party, it's, we are the only ones that are virtuous and righteous. Those people are evil at best, or foolish at best, and more probably evil. So I'd say, Whoopi, please stop the division. We can't do this as a nation. It doesn't really work as a nation. And there's very many people, most people on the other side have some moral framework for what they believe. They're trying to work out the world and politics as best they can, the way they see the world. That's called democracy. And we give each side a turn. We don't demonize, because that's what you end up with the Tutsis and the Hutus in Rwanda. You end up with civil war. So that's the first thing. But the second thing I would say would be to try to have a calm discussion and to say, can we look at the history of Iran's violence towards its own people, towards Americans? How many Americans have they killed? It's a pretty big number, numerous attacks. And to try to get her to understand what is the nature of radical Islam and what they really think of people like her, with people who espouse her views.
Yeah. And, being able to have these conversations. One of the other things that struck me just as we round out this conversation is the silence. I mean, there was a little bit of chatter, but from the other hosts, right? I mean, I'm sitting there thinking, is somebody else going to step into this and say, Alyssa, you're correct? And maybe they didn't, I didn't hear it, but I'm thinking there's no way this entire panel is thinking that this is an okay conversation, right? Like that this makes sense. And yet it felt like nobody else was willing to step in and say, okay, well, you're dealing with murder, horror, in a country that's been held hostage by a government. That is not something that in 2025, despite people wanting to say it's happening, is happening in America. I'll give you the final word.
I'm not even sure what to say. I mean, I think we both look at this and we say, you think of those other panelists and, you know, why does The View exist? Again, divide, create anger, produce votes in the end. And so God forbid someone would stand up for reason and say, hey, you know what? I think that conservative over there, the token conservative, I think she's got something, because then I might be, you know, I might be viewed as being on that side. But it is just crazy that there's no real discussion. No one denounced that. No one said, Whoopi, oh my gosh, give me a break. So again, though, that fits with, I think, my analysis of the show and what The View is.
Well, it would be great if The View actually balanced the conversation and helped people understand, and had, you know, numerous people on who were able to do that on both sides in a way that was compelling and offered something of value in this political discourse. Jeff, as always, I appreciate your time today.
Absolutely, Billy. Thank you.
That's all for today's Newsmakers. Make sure you head on over to the CBN News YouTube channel and cbnnews.com for more of the news you need to read. We'll see you again tomorrow.